Good morning or afternoon, depending on wherever you're watching this. Um, I'm going to try, and I say try because I'm notoriously long winded, to do a quick review of Period 6 for you using the required course content. Never fails. Just had a cat join me. So, Period 6 covers a lot of ground. If you remember, even if you don't, let's go back. Period 6 is from 1865, so the end of the Civil War, till 1898. The end of the Spanish-American War, I guess we're going with, it's about that time. Sorry. This morning is brought to you by Diet Mountain Dew. Got me burping. So let's take a look at the main objectives. I always kind of skip over the contextualizing. Maybe I shouldn't do that because we're struggling with context. So the big idea behind this is just that post-Civil War, there was a boom, right? And people started spreading across the continent. Technology was improving. We had new ideas and inventions. If you watched any of the videos on the list I posted not long ago about Period 6, one of the videos is about barbed wire, my favorite invention at the time, because it helped settle the West. But the point is, there's a lot of different innovation and technology at that time, which is one of the main ideas. But we see the growth of cities. We see an increase in immigration. So this period is that because we'd kind of gone through this horrible civil war, the country then began to move on and transform to reach the 20th century. Okay, so this is like that time period between Civil War, Civil War here, 20th century here, where we really start to change and transform into more of modern society. So the contextualizing is where does this fit in the grand scheme of things? Well, this is that change that goes from, we look at Civil War and up to it, farming, agriculture, muzzle loaders. When you think about war itself, you're using antique weapons compared to today, right? By the time we're done with this period, we're, modern society with modern vessels, steel ships, um, artillery, almost to the tank stage of life. We're very changed when we look at just weapons and war, but our society goes through a similar process, right? See, I'm already too long-winded. So let's go down to Period 6 and the first real major objective. That is westward expansion, economic development. Now, this is not about the Native American part yet. This is just talking about the change that happened, migration and settlement. And what is the main thing that led to mass migration to the West? I'll wait for it. Exactly. The Homestead Act. I'm sure somebody said that, right? You could also say, well, like the Transcontinental Railroad. Well, sure. But we only needed a transcontinental railroad because of the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act gave 160 acres to any individual or family that moved west, settled the land, and improved it. It was yours for free if you improved it. So there's a processing fee, and it doesn't matter. But you got free land, and that's a big deal, especially as population's growing, as immigrants are coming to the cities. Free land out west was a good deal. There were new technologies to help farming, new technologies to help us get there. And, we often romanticize about the Old West, this time period, what we call the Old West, pretty much disappears pretty quickly. Because the West was based on the cattle frontier. Cattle out roaming, cowboys rounding them up and taking them to the market, blah, blah, blah. That only lasted as long as, barbed wire. Once barbed wire comes along, you don't need cowboys. You have sectioned off pieces of land that says, this is my land. There's no wild roaming west. And that happens very fast. So that's what this first objective is about. Second one, moving forward. Migration and settlement, push and pull factors that shape immigration and migration within America, and the demographic change as a result of these moves. Okay, well, this is where you get into Native American conflict. That's that demographic change. Okay, when you have so many people moving west, whether it's for farming or for finding gold or for silver or whatever it is, ranching, you start to come in conflict or contact and conflict with the people that are already there. And that's what the second is about. White settlers wiping out resources like the bison or buffalo, or as I prefer to call Boomer, Tatanka. Tatanka. I really miss the classroom. I miss my buffalo. But anyway, but that's what it gets into. And then as Native Americans or whites are coming into the land, Native Americans are clashing with those whites. And that, of course, gets the government involved. And then we see the reservation system established. And so a very short period of time, the second objective, or technically third, is that transformation of the land and its people. Native Americans forced onto smaller and smaller chunks of land called reservations, whites settling, taking it over, demographic change. All right, on to 6-4, the New South. When they say the New South, this is often a term that's used in history, is the South transformed, sort of. Okay, the New South looks an awful lot like the Old South, except there's no slavery. It says, despite the industrialization of some segments of the Southern economy, a change promoted by the Southern leaders who called for the New South, agriculture based on sharecropping and tenant farming continued to be the primary economic activity. And then it goes on to talk about the situation for African Americans. This is the time where Jim Crow laws come into effect. It starts with the Black Codes, but as Reconstruction ends, Jim Crow laws come in and segregation is enforced. Many African Americans face violence and discrimination and are eventually taken into this second-class citizen status. So this unit includes the Reconstruction, so it talks about that process where the Reconstruction was a failure to protect the rights of the former slaves. And that's what this part's about. Okay, moving on. Technological innovation. All you got to remember is barbed wire. If there's an essay question about this, or the DBQs about this, like, write a page and a half on barbed wire. Okay, maybe that's a bad idea. Because they're talking about vast changes in technology. The railroad is a big one in this time. But we also have other inventions, use of electricity. Cities were kind of the hub of that sort of thing. Electricity and public transportation and indoor plumbing. Woo. But it also deals with industry. We looked at the robber barons during this time, right? Carnegie, inventing a new way to produce steel, becomes mega rich. John D. Rockefeller stabilizes kerosene, eventually makes gasoline, becomes mega rich. All these things are new, and that's this time period as well. Remember, we did that activity on robber barons, whether they were good guys or bad guys, captains of industry or robber barons. Turns out they're a little bit of both. All right. And that's what this next part is, the rise of industrial capitalism. The interplay between markets, private enterprise, labor, technology, and government policy shape the American economy. In turn, economic activity shapes society and government policy and drives technological innovation. And that's what all this is about. Large-scale industry, big businesses making it super rich. They sought to increase profits by developing monopolies, and they looked for outside of U.S. borders for greater influence over control of markets and natural resources. And this last bullet here, is one of those things, when we talk about part of this time period, we talked about imperialism as part of this time period. Now, the new framework puts imperialism in period 7, but we put it on period 6 because it makes sense there. Plus, period 7 is massive. It's got everything from 1898 through World War II, or 1890 through World War II. So it's really ridiculous. But this is where we talked about imperialism, and business and industry kind of helps fuel that. We're looking for new markets. We want to trade overseas, but we got to protect those trade routes. So we need a navy to do so. And then in order to fuel that navy, literally fuel it, we need coaling stations, because you can't make it all across the world with, just one load of coal. So we want bases. Where do we look? We go to Hawaii. Okay, we establish a base there. We look to the Philippines. We look to trading in China. So this is all connected. All right, and that's a good thing to remember, that the rise of industry is connected to our desire to push beyond our current borders. Next, labor in the Gilded Age. Here we talked about strikes. Unions forming. The first union being the Knights of Labor, but others came on the scene, right? The AFL, the CIO, American Federation of Labor. Who was the guy that led that? Hey, you're right, Samuel Gompers. Good job, you guys. You're really on top of things. So this talks about the attempts to organize, the strikes that happened, railroad strike, the Pullman strike, the Haymarket riot, all these things that fit into this time period. As industry is booming and profits are skyrocketing, workers are getting the shaft. Literally, if they work in a coal mine, it's this shaft. It's a coal mining joke. Anyway, they end up, trying to join together and improve their conditions, working conditions, money. They don't want to die at work that day, so they try to join unions that help protect them. That's what this part's about. On to the next one. Immigration and migration in the Gilded Age. This one really talks about immigration coming from mainly Europe. Now, remember, there's a change called the new immigrants, because previous immigration before 1890 had come from Northern and Western Europe for the most part. At this time, we start to see a change where it comes from Southern and Eastern Europe, and some from Asia. Now, there's a restriction on Asian immigration put in place in the 1880s. They called it the Chinese Exclusion Act, but they really meant like Asian people. Chinese. But this is where you go through the Ellis Island stage. The immigrants coming in through Ellis Island in large numbers and packing the cities and leading to all sorts of interesting neighborhoods in places like New York and Chicago and so on. That's the last one. It says urban neighborhoods based on particular ethnicities, races, and classes provided new cultural opportunities for city dwellers. But what they really meant is crazy. But immigrants came for many reasons: to escape poverty, to look for opportunities, to find land, and we had it. And so this time, again, we're talking about the change in society. It was an amazing change between the Civil War and 1900. Just a huge change in America through technology and land acquisition and immigration and industry. All of this happening to create this whole new world. And that's why this period is important. We kind of gloss over it at times, but it's a big one. Then we get responses to immigration. People were freaking out. They're like, oh, there's, this might sound not familiar to you. It's weird to think that there might be opposition to immigration, but turns out there was in the past. Before the wall, there were figurative walls. But there's increasing public debates over assimilation and Americanization when you had these new immigrants who were very different than previous immigrants, their cultures, their ideas. Mainly people were concerned because there were many Catholics coming to the United States, many Jews, and they thought that their religious values were different from, I mean, I know you're thinking, wait, Catholics? Aren't they pretty much the same as other? Yeah, but when America was built on a Protestant tradition, meaning anti-Catholic kind of, and Catholics start coming into the country in large numbers, people got nervous. So there was opposition to that immigration. Um, Immigration also caused all sorts of trouble in cities when you're looking at overcrowding and how to handle the new influx. And so you see people like Jane Addams that talks about here developing like settlement houses to try and help deal with that influx. It gets into social Darwinism and so on and so forth, but that's this part of the unit. All right, moving forward. The development of a middle class, the middle manager, the clerical workers, you really start to see the diversification of the workforce. I mean, you had up until this point, up until the 1860s even, the vast majority of Americans were farmers. But because of the industrial boom that occurs after the Civil War, you see a lot of people working in cities and working different jobs. And you got, suddenly there's all sorts of other jobs you need to do and have to run a corporation or to just make a city function or whatever. And so you see middle level workers that are making more money, and we start to see a middle class start to grow, although very slowly. But there you go. And then let's see, reform. This is so we're not looking at I guess we're getting into the beginnings of the progressive era, but what this one's more about is mainly farmers, like the Populist Party. Remember William Jennings Bryan and the Cross of Gold speech? The populists wanted to change to the silver standard. They wanted to have the government take over railroads. So along with the unions trying to change things, you have the populists. That was the farmers' revolt, so to speak. We read a packet on it. It's called the Farmers' Revolt. But what was happening is that the cities were getting all the attention, getting all the good money. The farmers were they felt like they were losing out. Monopolies were making their prices high for transportation of goods and so on. Large interest rates from banks were crippling their economy. So the farmers began to push for change as well as unions. But socialist movement came along, trying to gain the workers and trying to improve their conditions, so on. And women, of course, the women's movement, they're not quite at the voting stage yet. They're still pushing for it, but the women's movement was very active during this time as well. All right, let's see what else we got. Controversies over the role of government in the Gilded Age. Debates fostered by social and political groups about the role of government in American society, political and economic life, shaped government policies, institutions, and so on and so forth. Mostly the government was hands-off when it came to business, laissez-faire or laissez-faire, depends on how you feel like pronouncing it. They wanted to promote economic growth, but at the same time, when that was happening, that led to all sorts of abuses. And so there's a debate whether or not the government should get more involved in the economy or at least protecting citizens. And again, we're getting into expanding U.S. borders to try and gain influence around the world to shape their lives. We're almost done. Oh, here's where we get more of the politics to the politics in the Gilded Age. Talks about the Populist Party, which we sort of already touched on. The major political parties were still there, but really between this time and the Civil War, it was almost all Republicans. The Democrats had lost influence. They were associated with the South, even though it wasn't all South. But they lose a lot of influence during this time. So any presidents we had were basically Republicans, even state governors. It was like, even Wisconsin, we look at governors, they were all Republican. They were just varying degrees of Republicanness. This is when I talk about how there were two branches. Like you had the stalwarts, which are the traditional laissez-faire sort of Republicans, and you had the progressives, the ones that eventually morph into like a Teddy Roosevelt, where They believed in government action to protect citizens and restrict or not restrict competition, restrict the monopolies to promote competition and so on. But that's pretty much. It talks about the urban problems being the political machine, Tammany Hall, Boss Tweed, that sort of thing, where political machines controlled the cities and were doing what they could to enrich themselves, but not really fix the problems. And all of this stuff sort of leads into then this next time period where we're looking at the progressive era, a massive period of change where the progressives come in and try and say, we need to look at some of these problems created by this massive period of change. So that's kind of what this gets into. All right. We're not going to worry about continuity and change, but we are, I didn't really touch on imperialism because that's in the next unit and I'll cover it then. But for now, know that we talked about it in this part as another stage of this expansion, taking over Alaska and Hawaii, getting war with Spanish over territory. That's going to show up in period 7, technically. So I'll cover it then. But for now, there's a quick review of period 6. Hopefully you help jog some memory. There's also terms to look at. There's a ton of good videos I posted from AP, John Green. Watch some of it. Go through it. Refresh your memory. If there's something you don't remember, that's the key thing. Maybe you remember a lot about some of the stuff we touched on here, but you don't remember anything about the populists. Well, look that up. Watch one of the videos I posted on the populists. Or you don't remember anything about industrialization. Well, watch that one. Okay? Find your weak spots. Fill it. Do it. Do it. Sorry. Prequel reference. The easy prequel reference. We'll have to come up with some harder ones later. But for now, that's all I got for you. Enjoy. And keep checking Classroom for more activities.